A crisp wind swirls fallen crimson leaves across the manicured lawns of Harvard Yard, a peaceful scene made all the more serene by the absence of students. It's the rare quiet enjoyed by this corner of Cambridge, Massachusetts, during the university's winter break. But while the campus is still, it's far from dormant. Beneath the surface, an enduring legacy continues to thrive, one that stretches back to when this land was first settled by Europeans nearly 4 centuries ago. Welcome to this house. Today, we begin our journey through the history of Harvard University, America's oldest institution of higher learning, which was founded in 1636 in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. The story of Harvard begins in the middle of the 17th century in the New World. By 1630, several thousand Puritans had established a settlement in what would become known as Boston, Massachusetts. Originally called the Massachusetts Bay Colony, this settlement was founded by those seeking religious freedom from the Church of England. The Puritans who settled here were not the first people to inhabit the area. The land had been home to various Native American tribes for many generations. But now the Puritans sought to build a new life and a new society based on their own religious principles. As the colony grew, the settlers recognized the need for an institution to educate their children and shape the moral and intellectual character of their growing community. And so in 1636, the General Court of Massachusetts Bay, the colony's governing body, established the new college, later named Harvard College in honor of its first benefactor, John Harvard. But why was education so important to the Puritans? How did they view learning in general? The Puritans believed that education was essential in the formation of good and pious citizens. In their view, literacy and knowledge were not just tools for personal enrichment, but also means to understand and interpret the world around them through the lens of their faith. Their commitment to education stemmed from a deep respect for the power of ideas and their potential to shape individuals and society. The Puritans saw education as a means to cultivate virtuous and God-fearing men who could contribute to the spiritual and temporal well-being of the community. They believed that an educated citizenry was crucial for maintaining a stable and prosperous society and ensuring its continued success in the New World. In fact, the Puritans were highly suspicious of higher learning, which they associated with the frippery and immorality of European universities. For them, education should be practical and geared towards preparing individuals for their roles in society, rather than being purely theoretical or ornamental. So how did Harvard reflect these beliefs when it opened its doors to students in 1643? Well, the curriculum was heavily influenced by Puritan theology and emphasized the study of the classics and the training of ministers. The original 4-year curriculum consisted of 5 required subjects: the Latin and Greek languages, rhetoric, geometry, and astronomy. Students were expected to master these subjects through rigorous study and memorization, a practice known as the classical method. Upon graduation, many students went on to pursue careers in ministry as the Puritan leaders had envisioned. However, over time, the curriculum expanded to include other fields such as medicine and law. Despite the emphasis on religious studies, there was still room for intellectual exploration within the confines of Puritan thought. As the college evolved, it became a center for the exchange of ideas and a catalyst for intellectual growth, shaping the minds of some of America's earliest scholars and leaders. With its strong emphasis on religious studies and classical learning, Harvard initially played a significant role in shaping the cultural and intellectual landscape of early America. Throughout the colonial period, Harvard remained closely tied to the Puritan community that had founded it. The college's early graduates often held positions of influence in government and religion, perpetuating the Puritan legacy in various aspects of public life. However, as the 18th century progressed, the relationship between Harvard and the Puritan establishment began to shift. The Great Awakening, a series of religious revivals that swept through the colonies in the 1730s and 40s, challenged the traditional Puritan orthodoxy and led to a more diverse and independent-minded student body. Additionally, as the American Revolution approached, Harvard's curriculum began to reflect the growing intellectual ferment and calls for greater political participation. As we delve deeper into the history of Harvard University, we will explore how the institution navigated these changing times, balancing its religious roots with the evolving intellectual and political currents that shaped early America. The story of Harvard is intricately linked with the broader narrative of American history, from its early ties to Puritanism to its role in shaping the nation's intellectual and political landscape. It was during this period that the college began to shed its close association with Puritanism and evolve into a more secular institution. This transformation was gradual and complex, influenced by both internal and external factors. One of the key factors in this evolution was the increasing diversity of the student body. As Harvard's reputation grew, students from various religious backgrounds and social classes began to attend the college. This exposure to different perspectives challenged the homogeneity of thought that had characterized the early years and helped pave the way for a more inclusive and tolerant environment. Another significant factor was the expansion of the curriculum. Initially dominated by religious studies, Harvard's academic offerings gradually broadened to include a wider range of subjects, such as science, philosophy, and the arts. This diversification of knowledge challenged the confines of Puritan orthodoxy and encouraged critical thinking and intellectual exploration. Moreover, the growing influence of Enlightenment ideas on American soil played a pivotal role in shaping Harvard's trajectory. The emphasis on reason, individualism, and skepticism towards traditional authority structures resonated with many at the college, leading to a questioning of long-held beliefs and practices. As we continue our exploration of Harvard's history, we will examine the challenges and complexities of this transition from a religiously affiliated institution to a more secular one, highlighting the tensions and debates that arose during this period. Despite the challenges, Harvard's journey towards becoming a secular institution marked a significant step in the development of higher education in America. It set the stage for the emergence of universities that were open to students of all backgrounds and committed to the pursuit of knowledge without constraints of religious dogma. As we conclude this gentle introduction to Harvard's history, it's important to recognize the profound impact that the Puritan legacy had on the institution's early years. The values and beliefs of the Puritans, while evolving over time, left an indelible mark on Harvard's character and contributions to American society. From their emphasis on education as a means to form virtuous citizens to their commitment to the power of ideas and knowledge, the Puritans' influence shaped the intellectual and moral landscape of early America. Harvard, as the product of its time, reflected these values in its curriculum, faculty, and student body. As we move forward in this series, we will continue to explore how Harvard has balanced its historical ties to Puritanism with the changing intellectual and social currents that have influenced its evolution. The story of Harvard is a testament to the power of ideas, the importance of education, and the enduring legacy of those who dared to dream of a better world through learning. While the tranquility of winter break may still linger on the campus, the spirit of intellectual inquiry and pursuit of knowledge continues to thrive within these hallowed halls. Join us next time as we delve deeper into the rich tapestry of Harvard's history and uncover the stories that have shaped this iconic institution. Thank you for watching. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an exciting episode. And make sure to visit our website for additional content and to support the channel. Until next time, keep exploring and learning. The year is 1636, and a group of Puritan settlers are gathered together in the town of Cambridge, which at this point in history was little more than a clearing in the woods inhabited by a handful of families. Their settlement, which would eventually become known as New England, had been founded just a few years earlier with the arrival of John Winthrop's company of Puritan refugees seeking religious freedom from the Church of England. But now, amidst the struggles of a fledgling colony, they find themselves at a crossroads. On one hand, there is the pressing need to build homes, plant crops, and defend against the ever-present threat of attack from the native population or rival European powers. But on the other, these men, many of whom were ministers' merchants, or artisans, knew that the long-term survival of their colony depended upon something else, the creation of a learned and educated ministry capable of guiding the spiritual and civil affairs of a burgeoning state. In short, they needed schools and a college. But how could they even consider such luxuries when the colony had yet to turn a profit? How could they prioritize education over the very survival of their settlement? Well, first off, let me clarify that although the Puritan settlers did not arrive in North America with any silver spoons in their mouths, they certainly weren't destitute either. In fact, given the fact that they all voluntarily left England, sold their property, and pooled their resources to finance the voyage across the Atlantic, we can safely say that these people were well off by 17th century standards. What they lacked, however, was economic opportunity. And so far, life in New England hadn't exactly been a financial boon for them. Food was scarce, housing was rudimentary, and death rates were high. On top of all that, they had recently fought a brutal war with the natives, who still viewed the settlers as unwelcome guests on their land. But despite all of this, the Puritans persevered. They saw their hardships as but a momentary inconvenience compared to the eternal rewards that awaited them in the afterlife, if they remained steadfast in their devotion to God and His plan for their settlement. And as evidence of divine favor, they pointed to the remarkable success of their first harvest, which suggested that they may have finally found the economic stability they so desperately desired. Now, it was at this critical juncture that the Massachusetts General Court decided to invest in education. You see, the Puritans believed that each individual had a calling in life, a divine mission that they were duty-bound to fulfill. This calling might be to till the soil, raise cattle, craft tools, or preach the word of God. But whatever it was essential that each person follow it faithfully. Unfortunately, most of the ministers who accompanied the settlers to New England were neither trained nor particularly gifted in the role. And so the ministers who served as regents to the General Court, realizing that the future of their colony depended on creating a pool of educated clergy, petitioned the court to establish a college. And so in 1636, the Massachusetts Bay Company, which was essentially the governing body of the colony at this time, granted the request and established the new college at Cambridge. For their part, the ministers were ecstatic. In a letter to the Reverend John Cotton in England, the minister, John Eliot, wrote, "We cannot but look upon it as the greatest mercy of God to us in this country, that He hath raised up amongst us so many godly and learned ministers. For what would become of us without the ministry of the word, we do not desire to think." Now, while the timing of this endeavor was certainly ambitious, if not foolhardy, the Puritans' vision for their new institution was actually quite modest. Despite the grandiose name, the new college at Cambridge started out as nothing more than a meeting house made from unhewn timber and a schoolhouse constructed from planks. And given the lack of funds, students were expected to provide their own housing, meaning that the only residents of Cambridge were the handful of families living in the village and those attending the college. At least for now, that was the plan. But before classes could even begin, the Puritans had to address a major problem. They didn't have anyone to teach. And so they turned once again to England, this time sending a delegation of ministers to recruit teachers. When the delegation failed to return with any candidates, however, the Puritans were forced to get creative. And so it was that the college opened its doors in 1638 with a single student and no teachers. Can you believe it? A college with 0 professors. Nonetheless, classes began with 2 local ministers serving as tutors until such time as a proper faculty could be hired. And to that end, the Puritans used the meager funds available to offer the tutors salaries of £60 per year, plus free housing and board, which I guess wasn't all that meager actually, considering that the average laborer earned about £10 per year. As time went on, however, the Puritans came to realize that the realities of colonial life were far different from the ideal they had envisioned. And nowhere was this more evident than at their cherished college. See, unlike their counterparts back in England, the Puritan settlers of New England were mostly not landowners. In fact, aside from a few merchants, most of the settlers were small farmers, artisans, and laborers. And as such, they couldn't afford to send their children to a college, especially when the curriculum was entirely focused on theology and classical languages, which offered little practical value in a growing agricultural community. By 1642, then only 3 students were enrolled at the college, which forced the tutors to supplement their income by taking on private students. This arrangement worked well enough until the tutors were able to secure funding from the government to pay for their salaries, meaning that the college operated for nearly 6 years without charging tuition. By 1643, the Puritans had resolved to change this by instituting a system of fees based on a student's ability to pay. While this helped to generate revenue for the school, it also led to a decline in enrollment, especially after the American Revolutionary War broke out in 1775. See, the Puritans had always prided themselves on their commitment to education, believing that it was the key to unlocking God's plan for their colony. However, as the war dragged on and the cost of maintaining a college became too great, they were forced to make a difficult decision. Should they continue to fund the school at the expense of their dwindling economy? Or should they focus on winning the war and securing their independence from Britain? In the end, the Puritans opted to do both. After much debate, they agreed to scale back the college's operations and move it from Cambridge to the more central location of Concord. There, in a series of simple wooden buildings, the school continued to educate the next generation of New Englanders, albeit with fewer students and a more practical curriculum. It was during this time that the school began to incorporate courses on subjects like agriculture, carpentry, and surveying, which were much more relevant to the needs of their growing community. This shift in focus marked a significant departure from the original vision of the college, which had been designed to train ministers and scholars. But as the Puritan settlers adapted to the challenges of colonial life, so too did their institutions of higher learning. Now, despite these setbacks, the college endured, laying the foundation for the future State University of New England. In fact, it was during this time that some of the most important early American texts were written, including Increase Mather's Wonders of the Invisible World, which chronicled the Salem witch trials, and Cotton Mather's Magnalia Christi Americana, which provided the first comprehensive history of Christianity in North America. Both of these books were written in the college's library, which doubled as the home of the first publicly funded public school in the American colonies. Now, imagine, if you will, that you are a young Puritan boy named Samuel, making your way to school through the dense New England forest. Your schoolmaster is a stern but fair man named Thomas, who believes that education is the key to unlocking God's plan for each individual. The lessons you learn in his one-room schoolhouse are simple, focusing on reading, writing, arithmetic, and basic religious instruction. But they are no less important for that. Each day begins with a prayer and ends with a psalm, reminding you that God is the source of all knowledge and the guide of all righteous men. As you grow older, you attend the newly established college in Concord, where you are taught by some of the most learned men in the colonies. The curriculum is rigorous, emphasizing theology, classics, and philosophy. But you are also exposed to practical subjects like agriculture and carpentry. Life as a student is not easy, but you work hard, knowing that your success is not for your own sake, but for the sake of your family and your community. As you walk the campus, you pass by the humble wooden buildings, each one bearing silent witness to the dreams of a fledgling colony. In the evenings, you gather with your fellow students in the flickering lamplight, poring over ancient texts and debating the latest theological controversies. Outside, the wind whispers through the trees, carrying with it the sounds of the frontier, the buzz of insects, the hoot of an owl, the distant cry of a whippoorwill. These are the sounds of your world, a world on the edge of civilization, where the wilderness stretches as far as the eye can see, and the only law is the law of God and the law of the land. You know that your task as a Puritan is to tame this wilderness, to bring it under the yoke of civilization, and to Christianize its inhabitants. You also know, however, that this task will not be easy. The forests are ancient and vast, the animals are wild and dangerous, and the Native Americans are fierce and proud. But you are not afraid, for you have God on your side and you have the education and skills to succeed. You are a product of the Puritan vision, a man of God and a master of the frontier. Your story, like that of your colony, has just begun. Hey everyone, thanks for watching Chapter 2 of our series, Puritan Visionaries and Colonial America. Don't forget to check back for new episodes every week. And if you want to support our work, you can join our membership program today. And as always, thanks for watching. Welcome back to my channel. This is part 3 of our series about the early years of what would become the city of Boston. If you missed any of the earlier episodes, be sure to check out our playlist. And if you'd like to learn more about how cities grow from wilderness to the modern day, be sure to subscribe. As we left off in episode 2, the town of Boston was having a pretty rough winter. Governor Bellingham had just died. The General Court was about to take its first break for the season, and most people were looking forward to warmer weather. But there was one bright spot for the struggling settlement, a young minister named John Harvard. He'd been called to the New North Church, which at that point was still in Cambridge, but he was gone now moved to the settlement of Boston, and he brought with him a lot of books. Now, before we get into it, let me say this. When we think of famous rich people who donated money or land for public good, we usually think about multi-million-dollar buildings being named after them or statues being erected in their honor. But back then, the concept of namesake buildings wasn't really a thing. In fact, there was only one other case where something was named after an individual, and that was the island of Manhattan, which was named after a small island off the coast of England. So what we're about to see here is actually one of the earliest known instances of a building being named after a person. But back then, Ministers didn't make much money, so why did this young man have so many books? Well, the story goes that when John Harvard graduated from Emmanuel College, the school president noticed that John didn't have a set of books to call his own. See, back then, when students wanted to study, they had to borrow books. So the president lent him a complete set of the 326 volumes that he needed to graduate. John promised to return the books when he got to New England, but unfortunately, he never made it back to England alive. But he did send back a letter saying, "I cannot sufficiently express the deep sense I have of the obligations I am under to you, nor the ardent desire I have to do something worthy of your great kindness to me." He then went on to explain that he was now a minister, and his congregation was helping pay for his travel expenses to New England. Then he said, "When God shall release me from my present engagements, I shall give it my utmost to make some return of my indebtedness to you." Unfortunately, the letter doesn't tell us exactly what he planned to do. But according to tradition, he intended to repay the debt by starting a school in New England. In 1638, while serving a church in Charleston, he began collecting donations for the project. But just 2 years later, John Harvard became ill and died. But before that, he made one major change to his will. You see, his original plan was to leave half of his estate to his widow and half to his church. But now he left all of his property to his widow, and then stipulated that half of his estate should go to establishing a school in New England. He also added that the books that he'd borrowed should be returned to Emmanuel College. John Harvard never saw the settlement of Boston, but his widow, Elizabeth, did. After John died, she moved to Charlestown where she married Reverend Increase Mather. Then in 1642 she traveled to England to visit family and friends. While she was gone, Increase Mather was named minister of the First Church in Boston. That same year, she sent her brother Thomas to oversee the liquidation of her estate. Upon his arrival, Thomas began selling off John Harvard's belongings and using the money to purchase school books. These books were then turned over to Increase Mather. Then in 1643, Elizabeth joined them in Boston, and the three of them met with the General Court. At the time, the court was meeting in the home of Richard Fairbanks, which is why the building is sometimes referred to as the Old State House. Now, this meeting probably wasn't on the agenda because not much is known about it. However, Increase Mather later wrote about the event in a letter to his friend John Bridgman. In the letter, he says, "Mrs. Harvard, the widow of the late Mr. Harvard, who died in England, not long since came over into New England. She brought with her the books belonging to her late husband's library, which were very considerable. She delivered them to me and desired I would present them to the ministers and elders of the jurisdiction to set up a free school. And so we have done." So we know that they brought the books with them to this meeting, but we don't know if they brought all of the books or just a portion of them. We also don't know if they intended to use the donation to start a school, or if it was just an offer to help with an existing project. However, by 1646, it seems like everyone knew what was going to happen because in September of that year, the General Court passed a law to establish the new college in New England, but it was short-lived. Shortly after it was founded, it merged with the nearby Harvard College. So what happened next? Well, in 1647, Thomas Danforth, who was the treasurer of the colony, presented an account to the General Court that showed the amount of money that John Harvard left for the college. According to the records, Increase Mather received £797, 14 shillings and 9 pence. From that amount, he paid £221 for the books, and then used the rest of the money to purchase land for the school. According to legend, Increase Mather then presented the books to the General Court while they were meeting in the home of Richard Fairbanks, aka the Old State House. The story goes that the collection included 326 books, which represented £400 of the total gift. But again, we don't have much to go on except for the story that was written down decades after the fact. According to that story, when Increase Mather presented the books, he told the court, "Mr. President and members of the court, according to the will of the deceased, I present you with these books to be the beginning of a library for the intended college." Then apparently the court took a vote and decided to accept the books. However, there's no record of that vote in the official court minutes, so we may never know if that's true. One of the earliest references that we can find where the school was actually called Harvard College came in 1650 when Increase Mather attended a conference at the school that was also attended by the ministers from Connecticut and Rhode Island. But that wasn't the end of the story. You see, it's likely that John Harvard didn't intend for the college to be named after himself, but that's what ended up happening. However, he probably wouldn't have minded too much because in the letter to Elizabeth, John Harvard wrote, "My heart is that though I cannot be present amongst you in such a measure as I long for, yet I may in some measure be useful to the house of God and the good of the country, which is the end of human life and the reason of my coming into it." So John Harvard never intended for anything to be named after himself, but the settlers probably thought that the name would inspire future donors. And over the years, the school did grow. By 1657, it had over 200 students and eventually grew to become one of the largest colonial colleges. But now I want to hear from you. What do you think about the donation from John Harvard? Do you think that it was generous, or was it expected since he was a minister? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Also, big thank you to our supporters who help to make videos like this one possible. If you'd like to support the channel, please consider supporting us. And finally, if you want to learn more about how cities grow, be sure to check out our video on the history of zoning. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Alright. So Chapter 4, the first scholars in Harvard Yard's early days. Let's get into it. So the first thing we have to talk about is how the first few students lived. Okay? They slept in Spartan dormitories in the basement of what's now called Hollis Hall. They were required to attend religious services every day, had daily scripture readings, had prayers at meal times. There was a chaplain who basically made sure everybody was thinking about God pretty much all the time. And they couldn't even do their own laundry. It was done for them by enslaved people. And yet, despite all this, or perhaps because of it, Harvard actually turned out to be one of the most intellectually vibrant places in America for the next 100 years. Okay, let's start with the beginning. So when it opened in September of 1638, there were only 4 students. 2 were Puritans. One was an Anglican, which just means he went to the Church of England, okay? And then there was a Quaker, which probably meant he wasn't going to last very long at Harvard. But these 4 guys were the first members of what would eventually become the Harvard class of 1,642. So let's meet them really quick. So the first student we're going to meet is John Harvard, the man that the school is named after. He was an Anglican, which might sound like a problem given that the school was founded by Puritans. But his connection to England was actually really useful to the fledgling college. When he died in 1638, he left the school his library of over 400 books and half of his estate. And that provided the school with the funds to keep going while it was figuring itself out. Then we have our 2 Puritans, Matthew Danvers and Thomas Danforth. Dunmore came from a family of ministers and went on to become one himself. After graduating, he actually became president of Harvard in 1678, serving until his death in 1693. Then there's Thomas Danforth, who becomes Massachusetts Bay Colony's secretary and also served on the board of Harvard for many, many years. These 3, John Harvard, Dunmore, and Danforth, are considered the founders of Harvard. And then there's the 4th student, John Allyn, the Quaker. So Allyn was a little bit of a handful. Not only was he a Quaker, but he also chafed under the strict rules and regulations that the faculty tried to impose on him. Like, for example, in 1639, he got in trouble for staying out past curfew. Which really just goes to show that the story of Harvard is not just a story of the faculty and administration, but the students too. In fact, in 1639, the students wrote a document called The Humble Request of the Students of Harvard College, in which they complained about the food, saying that it was not only nasty, but it was not up to Puritan standards of frugality. You see, the thing about Puritans was they were supposed to be frugal and modest, right? That's what they were known for. And so if the food was fancy, that was not good. And there was also too much food, which again, was not good, and they wanted more say in what they ate. And ultimately, they got what they wanted. The college actually hired a committee to come in and audit the kitchen and overhaul the menu. And this ended up being a really important moment in the history of dining halls everywhere because the committee's report was the first written record of a student food strike in America. And it led to students having more of a voice in their dining halls, which is something that continues to this day. Okay, now back to the story. So remember how I said that there were only 4 students in 1638? Well, that was true. But in 1639, 26 more showed up. So it looked like the college might actually work, but then in 1640, it nearly died. See, the reason there were only 4 students in the first place was because of a smallpox epidemic. And in 1640, another one hit New England and wiped out 1/5 of the population. And nearly all of the new students that had enrolled in 1639 died, but even in the face of this, the school soldiered on. And in 1641, a new charter gave it the power to award degrees, which meant that finally in 1642, the first class graduated. And this graduating class was actually pretty special because it included Increase Mather and Jonathan Mayhew, who both went on to become very famous Puritan ministers. Now, during this time, the college didn't really have a president. It had rectors, but it operated very differently than it does today. So here's what those early rectors did. So the first rector was John Brethwaite, who was kind of a pain in the butt, often getting in fights with the faculty and students. And he actually got expelled from the college in 1644, only to sneak back in and live out the remainder of his life in Harvard Yard. And then the second rector was John Ox, who was also a pain in the butt, but he was a different kind of pain in the butt than Brethwaite. Brethwaite argued that the Board of Overseers had too much power, whereas Ox argued that the Board of Overseers didn't have enough power. Ox wanted more power for the faculty, but he was fired before he could do anything about it. And then the third and final rector was Thomas Shepard, who was also a minister, and he was a lot less interested in arguing with people and a lot more interested in making sure that everyone knew God loved them. So he launched a series of public events to promote what was called the half-hour meditation. This was a tradition started by Puritans where everyone would stop what they were doing for a whole hour every day, ideally outside, and contemplate the majesty of God, and the town of Cambridge adopted this tradition and celebrated it with bonfires and fireworks and celebrations, which made Shepard extremely happy until he died in 1649. Okay, alright, so we've met some students, we've met some rectors, but what about the faculty? What were classes like? So when it started, the curriculum was Latin, Greek, and theology. There were no departments, no majors, no minors. There was only the classics and religion. And teaching was a lot less formal than it is today. Classes took place all over the place, in homes, in churches, and even in taverns. In fact, the very first building used for classes wasn't even on the campus. It was a church called the First Parish Church of Cambridge. And you can still see the plaque marking the spot where the building once stood on the corner of Garden and Brattle Streets. The first full professor was a guy named John Rogers, who taught the classics. He was also the first person to hold what we call today the Charles Eliot Norton Chair of the Greek and Latin languages. But don't worry, he didn't teach modern Greek or Latin. He taught ancient Greek and Romance stuff. The first graduate, Increase Mather, went on to write one of the first histories of Harvard, which was published in 1705, and in it, he described his professors like this. The former professors, according to Mr. Mather, were men of singular parts, great learning and good life, men who made divinity, humanity, and the mathematics so many divine and delightful arts as appeared by the excellent discourse of their lectures. What? In other words, professors weren't just scholars, they were also paragons of virtue. And this was a value that the college held on to for a long time. And the first librarian was Ezekiel Rogers, who was also the minister of the church that the college used for classes. And Mather has this to say about him. His well-stored library afforded many helps towards their improvement, and the whole body of the college were bound by rules to read constantly and to make good use of the library. In other words, he created a culture of scholarship. And so that brings us to the end of chapter 4, and if you want to hear more about the history of Harvard, well, then you should definitely subscribe because next week we gonna talk about how Harvard grew from a small Puritan school to the center of the American intellectual world. I'm your host, and I make videos about all kinds of things, including historical tales from the campus of Harvard University. If you like what I do, please subscribe.
The college had survived the English Civil War, King Philip's War, and 2 different colonial governors, and yet some people were still asking whether it was worth all the trouble. This is Chapter 5 of our series on the history of Harvard University. In October of 1676, a delegation from the Massachusetts General Court arrived at the college to investigate whether the institution was a net benefit to the colony, or whether it should be shut down to focus on more pressing matters like, not getting massacred by Native Americans. There were 3 main complaints about the college. First, that it was too expensive. Second, that there weren't enough students. And third, that it wasn't training ministers well enough. To address the first point, the General Court appointed a committee to look over the accounts of the college and see if they could find any waste that they could cut. They found a few small things, mostly involving a couple of servants who were given slightly higher salaries than necessary. But for the most part, Harvard was being run very efficiently. It cost about £1,300 per graduate, which adjusted for inflation would be about $26,000. That's a lot, especially for a working person. But remember that these students were mostly coming from wealthy families. In fact, by 1677, half of Harvard's graduates were the sons of men who had been original landowners in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, so the price tag went down significantly if you averaged it out over the course of several generations. As for the second complaint, that there weren't enough students, these was true, but for once this was actually a good thing. See, Harvard's curriculum and teaching methods were heavily influenced by Emmanuel College in England, whose motto was a sound mind in a healthy body. Part of this ideal included having a small student body where the professors could give their full attention to each individual student. It also meant that the college was able to maintain high standards, while also keeping tuition low. If the college had more students, then those standards would have to fall just to keep the price down. Also, by this point, Harvard was already addressing the issue of low enrollment by starting to accept students younger than 14. Before that, all students had to be at least 16, which was a relatively high barrier to entry when you consider that most kids stopped schooling after 8th grade. Finally, even though only 137 students graduated from Harvard before 1700, we have to remember that this was during a time when literacy was extremely important. In fact, literacy rates among white males in New England in the late colonial period was about 75%, which is almost as high as it is today. There were few professions that required reading or writing, and so those who did have those skills tended to do well for themselves. You could say that the real accomplishment of Harvard during this time was UNT how many graduates it produced, but how many people it didn't produce. Harvard created an educated elite that helped to turn New England into what historian Bernard Bailyn called the most literate, most argumentative, and most politically effective society in the whole colonial world. This brings us to the third complaint, that Harvard wasn't properly training ministers. In fairness, this was probably the intention. When the college was founded, its purpose was to train Puritan ministers, who would help to spread the gospel throughout the New World. By 1676, however, the Puritan population of Massachusetts had become quite stable, and there was no longer a need to train hundreds of new ministers every year. Instead, the college began to turn out ministers with broader educations, men who knew more about science, philosophy, and literature than previous generations of Puritans. Some historians have argued that this broadening of education was actually a bad thing for the colony, because it led to a decline in religious piety. However, I think it is better to see it as a natural evolution in the life of the college and the colony itself. As Massachusetts grew older and wealthier, its institutions, including Harvard, had to grow and change along with it. Besides, the Puritan clergy was already becoming more educated. The next generation of ministers were attending Harvard and then going on to study at Oxford or Cambridge before returning home. By this point, it was clear that Harvard was here to stay. And so the real question became how to make the college better. Much of this would come from expanding the physical plant. Between 1677 and 1700, Harvard received 7 major gifts of land and buildings, including the estate of John Danvers, which contained 12 rooms and extensive gardens. These rooms would become the first permanent college building outside of Massachusetts Hall. Then, in 1692, Harvard received a gift of 300 volumes from a recently deceased benefactor. This would become the foundation of what is today the largest library in the Western Hemisphere. And so that brings us to the end of the colonial period and the beginning of a new century. We'll talk more about what happened in Chapter 6, but for now let's take stock. How did Harvard go from a fledgling school of 40 boys to one of the largest and wealthiest colleges in the colonies? Well, the answer's pretty simple. While Harvard certainly received generous funding from the Massachusetts General Court, most of the money came from private donations. Between 1636 and 1699, the college received 83 separate gifts of money or property. Most of these gifts came from wealthy Puritans, who wanted to create a godly institution of higher learning. But others came from people who saw the value of an educated citizenry. One example was John Cogan, an innkeeper and trader who left £400 to establish a public school in Boston. Another example was Robert Gutu, a merchant who left £100 to set up a grammar school in his hometown of Salem. These examples reflect a key aspect of Harvard's mission, which was to serve the common good of the colony. From its earliest days, Harvard was conceived of as a public good, something that would benefit not just the wealthy donors, but the whole community. Think about it. When John Harvard left his books and his estate to the college, he didn't stipulate that only rich kids could use them. Similarly, when other people made donations, they didn't put restrictions on who could benefit from their gifts. This is one of the reasons why Harvard has always had an open admissions policy. It doesn't matter how poor you are. You can still get in if you work hard and get good grades. Or to put it in the words of the college's first president, "The Lord hath more gifts in store for this infant university to enrich it, and bless it in the progress of so many years as shall make it appear to the utmost his sovereign power and bountiful goodness." Now, that quote was written in 1643, but it could have been written at any point in Harvard's history. That's because the school's commitment to serving the common good has remained constant throughout its history. From the earliest days of the college, Harvard was a place where people from all walks of life could come together to learn and grow. It didn't matter if you were rich or poor, male or female, black or white. If you were willing to work hard and excel academically, then Harvard was a place where you could succeed. Take, for example, the class of 1647. This class contained 6 members, including Increase Mather, who would go on to become the most influential Puritan minister of his day. But it also included John Danforth, who would become the wealthiest man in the colony. And it included William Stoughton, who would become one of the judges at the Salem witch trials. These men came from different backgrounds and had different viewpoints, but they were united in their desire to learn and better themselves. The same can be said of the students who came to Harvard in the following decades. Among them were men who would go on to become doctors, lawyers, merchants, farmers, ministers, and even soldiers. Some of these men, like John Hancock and Samuel Adams, would play a key role in the American Revolution. Others, like Increase Sumner and John Davis, would go on to become U.S. senators. Steel authors, like Roger Sherman and James Sullivan, would sign the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. What's more, Harvard was a place where women could come to learn, even though they couldn't earn a degree until 1954. Women were admitted as students in the early days of the college, and several of them distinguished themselves as scholars. For example, the class of 1650 contained 2 women, both of whom gave birth during their studies, yet both continued to take classes until they graduated. One of them, Elizabeth Freer, would go on to become the first woman to publish a book in the American colonies. Another example was Anne Bradstreet, who was considered the best poet in the colonies. She published several volumes of poetry, including one that was dedicated to her husband, Simon Bradstreet, who was one of the earliest graduates of Harvard. Finally, Harvard was a place where black students could come to learn. Although again, they couldn't earn a degree until 1954. The first black student, a man named Onesimus, arrived in 1649 and several more followed. Although their records are incomplete, we know that at least one of these students, Phillis Wheatley, went on to become one of the most famous poets in the colonies. The point is that from its earliest days, Harvard was a place where people from all walks of life could come together to learn and grow. It was a microcosm of the American ideal, a melting pot of cultures and backgrounds, a place where everyone was judged by the content of their character and not by their race, gender, or wealth. That's it for this episode. Thanks for watching. The Great Courses Plus is brought to you by one. The ideas of the Enlightenment had an enormous impact on the curriculum at Harvard during the 18th century. While it's true that some professors resisted these new ideas, others championed them, and among the most enthusiastic was none other than President Edward Holyoake, who we met in Chapter 4. He had been educated in England, where he'd come under the influence of Newtonian science and Lockean liberalism, and when he returned to Harvard, he began to shape the curriculum in his own image. By the time of the 7 Years' War, which America entered in 1756, Harvard was graduating students like John Adams and Samuel Adams, who would go on to become leading figures in the American Revolution. In this video, we are going to look at how Harvard educated those men, and what role the university played in the lead-up to the American Revolution. This is Harvard, the story of a university and the people who made it great. In our last video, we saw how the 7 Years' War led to a substantial increase in Harvard's endowment. The war would have a similar effect on the student body. As the war with France intensified, young men across New England sought to escape conscription into the military by enrolling in Harvard. by the middle of the 18th century. The average age of a Harvard student was 16 or 17, but with the onset of the French and Indian War, many older men were putting off marriage and military service by attending college. By 1769, Terre Aubert, 500 students enrolled. Harvard, like all New England colleges, was still religiously affiliated. The Massachusetts Charter of 1650 required that all candidates for admission be examined in the fundamentals of the Christian faith. But as we saw in Chapter 3, Puritan theology had shifted away from the rigid orthodoxy of the previous century. Today, ministers were much more willing to admit students who did not intend to become ministers themselves. But Harvard was not alone in its diversification. The colonial legislatures were also beginning to see the value of a college education. Sons of wealthy planters in Barbados began attending Harvard, as did the sons of silver miners from Mexico. In fact, at one point, 2/3 of Harvard students were not even from New England. While a degree from Harvard was increasingly seen as a good investment for young men from throughout the colonies, few were as committed to the institution as John Hancock, born in Braintree, Massachusetts. In 1737, Hancock was the son of a wealthy shipping merchant. Upon his father's death, he inherited a fortune, and rather than spend his life working, Hancock decided to enroll in Harvard College in 1754. Though he had paid his tuition, he never really liked school, and after graduating in 1757, he returned home to Braintree, where he spent most of his time managing his estate. Though he had little interest in farming, he quickly became involved in politics and was elected to the Massachusetts General Court. Across town in Cambridge, Samuel Adams was taking a very different path to political prominence. Also born in Boston in 1722, Adams was the son of a well-to-do family. His grandfather had been a signer of the original Massachusetts Bay Charter, and his father was an important figure in the colony. Samuel, however, was not destined for a career in politics. In fact, he initially attended Harvard hoping to become a minister. After graduating in 1740, Adams took up the study of theology, but soon abandoned the ministry for mercantile pursuits. He joined his cousin John Hancock in the business of importing Madeira wine. Unlike Hancock, Adams had little money, so he threw himself into his work. While he was moderately successful in business, he never made much money, and he supplemented his income by serving as a clerk for the Massachusetts General Court. It was in this position that he became politically active. While both men would become key leaders of the American Revolution, their personalities could not have been more different. Hancock was known for his charisma and good humor. Adams was not. His contemporaries described him as being taciturn and disagreeable. Yet both men shared a commitment to public service and a deep suspicion of British policy. Though both men had graduated from Harvard years before, they would return to campus in the 1760s to teach. In 1760, John Hancock was appointed a lecturer in mathematics and natural philosophy, while Samuel Adams took up the study of rhetoric. By this time, the curriculum at Harvard consisted of 7 core subjects: rhetoric, grammar, logic, natural philosophy, or physics, mathematics, astronomy, and ethics and politics. There was also a requirement for 4 years of biblical study. Upon his arrival, Adams quickly set about reforming the curriculum. He insisted that students master the classics, reading Homer in Greek and Virgil in Latin. He wanted them to know the history of Greece and Rome, as well as English literature. Adams taught the subject of rhetoric, which combined elements of grammar, logic, and ethics. It was in rhetoric that students learned the skills of public speaking and writing. For Adams, rhetoric was not merely a matter of pleasing the audience. Rather, he taught his students to use language to persuade and inspire action in order to bring about political reform. His favorite example was the Roman orator Cicero, whose speeches on behalf of the Roman Republic Adams held up as the ideal of civic virtue. Hancock, meanwhile, was teaching the newly fashionable science of Newtonian physics. Physics was one of the subjects added to the Harvard curriculum in the early 18th century. In Newtonian physics, the universe was governed by immutable laws that could be discovered through reason. Once discovered, those laws could then be used to improve the human condition. Newtonianism was thus the perfect subject for a young American republic seeking to chart its future course. As the faculty of Harvard grew in the 1760s, so too did the number of students. By 1769, enrollment had reached over 500. This rapid growth led to the construction of several new buildings, including Hollis Hall in 1763 and Mackintosh Hall in 1769. These new buildings created much-needed classroom space, but also provided much-needed housing for the growing student body. This expansion meant that Harvard now had the capacity to educate every young man of prominence in New England. And nowhere was this more evident than in the classroom of Increase. Born in Boston in 1696, Increase was the son of Cotton Mather, the most important minister in New England. After graduating from Harvard in 1714, he became the minister of the First Church in Boston. As such, it was his duty to deliver the annual sermon before the Harvard Phi Beta Kappa Society. In 1738, Mather delivered a sermon entitled The Goddess of Discord, in which he argued that the responsibility of educated men was to advance the public good. Specifically, Mather called on Harvard graduates to engage in politics. Too many educated men, he said, shied away from politics, treating it as something beneath the dignity of a scholar. But Mather argued that nothing could be further from the truth. Politics, he said, was the highest calling of all, because it gave educated men the opportunity to serve the public good. This sermon was so influential that it became required reading for all future Harvard graduates. If Mather's words inspired his audience, they were backed up by the example of his brother, William, a decade older than Increase. William had been educated in England and was one of the first ministers to embrace the Newtonian worldview. In 1727, he published The Christian Philosopher, in which he argued that faith and reason were compatible. If anything, he said, reason made faith more meaningful. It was not the province of the minister to deny scientific discoveries, but rather to show how those discoveries pointed to the power and wisdom of God. In this way, William helped pave the way for the rise of liberal Christianity in New England. Like his brother, Increase also had a profound influence on the students at Harvard. While Increase preached the importance of public service, he taught a generation of students that science and religion were not at odds. It was this openness to new ideas that made Harvard such a hotbed of revolutionary thought. In 1769, the Massachusetts General Court purchased a tract of land north of the Charles River and laid out the streets of a new town. They named it in honor of the college. This event marked a significant moment in the development of Harvard. No longer was it merely located near a village. It now occupied the center of its own town. This, along with the construction of new dormitories and the erection of a new library building, transformed the campus. And today's Harvard Yard is the result. It was here in the heart of Harvard Yard that a group of students gathered in 1772 to discuss the events in Boston Harbor, when British soldiers fired upon a crowd of protesters, killing 5. The students rushed to join the growing crowd in downtown Boston. In the wake of the massacre, the students organized a boycott of British goods, and by 1773, the merchants of Boston had joined the boycott, cutting off the flow of British goods to the entire American colonial system. This nonviolent resistance to British policies would only grow until finally in 1775, the American Revolutionary War broke out. John Hancock and Samuel Adams would play starring roles in the coming conflict, but we'll have to leave their story, as well as the story of Harvard, until next time. Thank you for watching this episode of Harvard, the story of a university. If you enjoyed this episode and want to learn more about the fascinating world of 18th century America, I encourage you to check out the amazing courses on Wondrium. Wondrium is the rebrand of the Great Courses, and it has an amazing online learning platform with thousands of high-quality, in-depth courses, spanning history, science, math, literature, philosophy, and more. The series America's Revolutionary Generation from the Great Courses is an excellent place to continue your journey through 18th century America. You can learn all about the intellectual and political ferment that gave rise to the American Revolution, from the Founding Fathers to the common foot soldiers. ULL explored the ideals of the American founding and examined how those ideals have shaped the nation and inspired revolutions around the world. I love learning, but I don't always have time to sit down and watch a whole documentary or lecture. That's why I'm so excited to partner with Wondrium. Their bite-sized pieces let me fit learning into my busy schedule, whether primera, a bit 10 minutes, or an hour. Wondrium has something for me, and right now, viewers of this channel get a free trial and 26 off an annual subscription when you sign up at Wondrium. .com/the story of a university. That's Wondrium.com/the story of a university. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Alright, it's time to get back to our regularly scheduled programming. We're doing a little bit of catch-up here because we missed Chapter 7 of our book, which is called Harvard and the Birth of a Nation. So let's go ahead and dive right in. This chapter covers a very exciting period in Harvard's history where the fledgling college becomes, if not officially, then at least unofficially, a part of the American Revolution and helps lay the foundation for the new nation that would eventually replace British colonial rule. But before we jump into it, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and follow us on social media. Also, be sure to visit our website. Okay, so the opening of the chapter gives us some historical context for the revolution that has been building since the end of the French and Indian War. Things are tense between Great Britain and her American colonies, and there is a lot of tension being built over things like taxation without representation. And according to historian Nathalie Handel, who wrote this book by 1763, only 2 years after the end of the French and Indian War, anti-British feeling ran so high that the students at Harvard, and she's talking about Harvard College here, not necessarily the modern university, but Harvard College, specifically they were celebrating the anniversary of the war's end by burning an effigy of William Pitt the Elder. For those of you who don't remember, William Pitt the Elder was a British statesman whose policies towards the colonies caused much consternation among the colonists. He is the one responsible for a lot of the taxation without representation stuff that we learned about in school. Anyway, all this mounting tension comes to a head in 1770, when British soldiers fire on a crowd of unarmed protesters in Boston, killing 5 and instantly escalating tensions between the colonies and Britain. Meanwhile, back at Harvard, the students are planning their annual holiday celebration, which they intend to hold at the home of John Hancock, a wealthy merchant and smuggler, and also a graduate of Harvard College, class of 1754. Now, the celebrations do last long, because word comes that British troops are heading to Cambridge to put down the rebellion. And so the college president and several faculty members ask the students to vacate the dormitories and turn them over to the military. The soldiers arrive on October and move right in, turning Harvard College into barracks for the troops, and so the school closes down for the next 2 years. Now, while the students are gone, their president, Edward Holyoake, refuses to leave Cambridge, and he's not alone. Faculty members stay behind as well, sharing the campus with British soldiers and making the best of a bad situation. It wasn't all that bad, really. Historian Handel writes, "The soldiers respected the college's property. They paid for firewood and they even pitched tents on the parade ground to keep out of the president's S-way." So that's the backdrop for this chapter. It opens with the closure of the college in 1770 and runs through the official end of hostilities in 1783. During these years, Harvard College graduates play key roles in the fight for independence, both military and political, and help shape the new nation. Let's meet some of them. John Hancock, whom I mentioned earlier, is probably the most well-known of Harvard's revolutionary generation. He's the richest man in Boston, importing wine, sugar, spices, and other luxury goods from Europe. When he's not celebrating with Harvard students, he's helping to organize resistance to British policies, smuggling goods to avoid paying taxes, or as he will soon do, commanding the militia. At the start of the revolution, he sends his servants and slaves away to avoid their capture by the British. And when the Revolutionary War breaks out in 1775, he joins the Massachusetts Committee of Safety, which oversees the raising of troops and directs the defense of Boston. When the fighting begins, he leaves his civilian life behind and takes command of the militia, becoming one of the first major figures in the Continental Army. Meanwhile, British authorities charge him with crimes against the crown and seize his estate. After the war ends, he serves as governor of the newly independent Massachusetts Bay. Samuel Adams, another member of Harvard's class of 1754, plays a critical role in whipping up support for the revolution. He's a lawyer by trade, and he uses that training to advocate for colonial rights and freedoms. He organizes groups like the Sons of Liberty, which seeks to undermine British policies through protests and civil disobedience. And he authors inflammatory pamphlets that turn public opinion against the crown. In one case, he organizes a boycott of British goods, which is successful enough that merchants in England lobby Parliament to repeal the offending laws. He attends the Continental Congress in 1774, and he attends the First Provincial Congress in 1775, serving as a delegate from Boston. At the outbreak of war, he supports the Declaration of Independence and helps draft the Massachusetts Constitution, and afterwards, he continues to serve in the Continental Congress until 1785. John Jay, a member of Harvard's class of 1764, goes on to become one of the founding fathers, signing both the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Early in his career, he defends the rights of those accused of crimes in a system he sees as stacked against them. In 1774, he attends the Continental Congress as a delegate from New York and votes in favor of independence. He then travels to France in 1776 to seek military and financial aid, but is unsuccessful. Instead, he goes to Spain, where he signs a trade agreement that allows American ships to carry goods from Spanish America to Europe, duty-free. Afterwards, he returns to New York and chairs the committee that drafts the state constitution. Later, he serves as governor of New York, Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, and U.S. Minister to the United Kingdom. James Bowdoin, another member of Harvard's class of 1764, represents Massachusetts at the Continental Congress and votes in favor of independence. He later serves as governor of Massachusetts from 1797 to 1805. John Lowell, Jr., also a member of the class of 1764, goes on to serve in the Continental Navy during the war. Then afterward, he serves as a U.S. Senator from Massachusetts and is one of the original members of the American Antiquarian Society. Increase Sumner, class of 1769, serves as a chaplain in the Continental Army, then later as a senator from Massachusetts. And finally, Joseph Warren, a member of Harvard's class of 1768, volunteers for the Continental Army Medical Department and serves as regimental surgeon. In 1770, while the students are celebrating their holiday at John Hancock's house, he meets Paul Revere, who tells Warren that the British are coming to arrest him. So Warren grabs his musket and heads to the Old North Church to warn the others. Warren goes on to serve as Major General in the Continental Army, ultimately dying in the Battle of Bunker Hill. In total, at least 250 members of the Harvard community served in the American Revolution, either as officers in the Continental Army or as elected representatives in the Continental Congress. This list includes many prominent figures, such as Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Rush, who attended Harvard for a single year each, but did not graduate. So, now that we've met some of the people involved, let's talk about what happens next. The closing years of the 1700s are a period of intense activity and change for the college and the country. From 1776 to 1783, Harvard's campus is occupied by British troops. The war for independence is raging and the future of the nation is uncertain. But despite these challenges, Harvard's faculty and students are determined to keep the college alive. They defy British orders to close the school and continue to admit new students. By the end of the war, enrollment has nearly doubled. As the war comes to a close, the college begins to plan for its future. In 1784, the Massachusetts General Court grants Harvard a charter, establishing it as a degree-granting institution with the power to confer bachelor's, master's, and doctoral degrees. This is a significant departure from the college's origins, as a school focused solely on training clergy. With this new authority, Harvard begins to expand its curriculum beyond the traditional focus on divinity, theology, and the classics. The school adds courses in law, medicine, and the sciences, laying the foundation for professional schools that will come later. As a result, the student body diversifies, attracting students from a wider range of backgrounds and interests. This shift in focus reflects the changing needs of the nation as it moves forward from the Revolutionary War. The new United States is in need of skilled professionals in fields such as law and medicine to help govern and rebuild the country. Harvard recognizes this need and adapts accordingly, ensuring that it is prepared to meet the challenges of the 21st century. By the end of the chapter, we see a transformed Harvard emerging from the turmoil of the American Revolution. Its facilities have been damaged by war, but its curriculum has been expanded and its student body diversified. The college has played a vital role in shaping the nation's identity, and its graduates are well positioned to lead the new country into the future. The stage is set for the next chapter in Harvard's history. Okay? That's where we'll pick up in our next video. If you like this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and follow us on social media. Check out our website, and as always, Thanks for watching. A new president in 1869 brought a reform-minded approach to teaching and learning, and by the end of the century, Harvard was known around the world for its academic excellence. What were the key events that made this possible? Let's find out. Hello and welcome to the WGBH series, The Presidents Are Coming. I'm your host. Each week, we LL bring you a new episode on one of America's presidents, from the 1st through the 46th, looking at their lives, their presidencies, and their enduring legacies. Join us each week as we explore the highs and lows, the scandals and successes, the policies and the politics that have shaped our nation. Today, we'll look at Chapter 8, the 19th century. Reform, science, and expansion. It was a good day at the ice casino when Charles William Eliot arrived at Harvard in 1869, alumnus of the class of 1831. Eliot had just stepped down as secretary of the Massachusetts Board of Education, where he had modernized that state's public schools. In addition, he was well known for his support of the new science of psychology and for his advocacy of coeducation. All these progressive ideas would soon become part of the Harvard story. The son of a wealthy dry goods merchant, Eliot enjoyed a privileged upbringing with ample opportunity to pursue higher education. But while attending Harvard, he had been deeply affected by the plight of poor children who had few educational options. Their condition troubled him throughout his life and was a motivating force behind his career in education. Upon his arrival at Harvard, Eliot quickly set about modernizing the college. One of his first acts was to introduce a more diversified curriculum. Until then, Harvard students had been required to study a prescribed set of subjects known as the Common Curriculum. This consisted of rhetoric, or public speaking and writing, logic, natural philosophy, which is to say physics, chemistry, astronomy, and mathematics. Latin, Greek, and Hebrew were also required. While this was adequate preparation for those going into ministry or law, it did not sufficiently prepare students for careers in science, technology, or business. In order to address this issue, Eliot introduced elective courses, allowing students to choose from a variety of subjects outside the common curriculum. Though initially controversial, the elective system became a cornerstone of American higher education. Today, the vast majority of college students take at least some elective courses. While advocating for a more diversified curriculum, Eliot was simultaneously modernizing the faculty. He understood that in order for Harvard to thrive, it needed to offer students instruction in emerging fields, such as psychology, sociology, and economics. But at the time, departments offering such courses were not considered proper academic disciplines, so Eliot began by hiring professors whose expertise lay outside traditional departments, giving them titles such as Professor of Mental and Moral Philosophy and Professor of Economic Science. These individuals taught what would today be called social science courses and helped shift the focus away from the classics toward the modern world. Eliot knew that for Harvard to succeed, it also needed to embrace science. At the time, many scientists were trained abroad, often in Europe, and Eliot sought to change that. He hired scientists and provided them with laboratory space so that they could conduct research on campus. By doing so, he transformed Harvard into one of the leading centers of scientific research in the United States. To further strengthen the sciences, Eliot established several prizes for scientific work, including one to encourage international collaboration in scientific endeavors. The first, Lawrence Scientific Expedition, sent Harvard scientists to Hawaii in 1887 to observe an upcoming total solar eclipse. They returned valuable data that helped advance scientific understanding of solar eclipses. Eliot's vision for science at Harvard would grow into one of the university's greatest strengths. Today, Harvard scientists make significant contributions to various fields, including medicine, physics, chemistry, biology, and earth sciences. Their work has led to advancements in fields such as gene editing, artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, and climate change research. Another of Eliot's notable contributions was the establishment of a graduate school in 1872. Recognizing the importance of advanced degrees, Eliot created the first PhD program in the United States. At the time, earning a doctorate was not common among American students, but Eliot believed that a strong graduate program was essential for any top-tier university. His vision helped establish Harvard as a leader in graduate education. And today, Harvard has one of the most prestigious graduate schools in the world. Yet another one of Eliot's accomplishments was his promotion of coeducation. A firm believer in equal access to education for all, Eliot opened up Harvard to women. However, he faced opposition from conservative members of the Board of Overseers, the governing body of the university. Despite this, Eliot pressed forward, admitting the first female students in 1871. Their presence led to the creation of new opportunities for women at the university and helped pave the way for future generations of female scholars. While Eliot made significant strides in diversifying the student body, faculty, and curriculum, he also expanded the physical plan. To accommodate the growing student population, Eliot oversaw the construction of several new buildings, including dormitories, classrooms, and libraries. He also introduced new technologies, such as the telephone, 2D campus. These improvements enhanced the quality of student life and contributed to the growth of the university. However, Eliot's legacy is not without its critics. Some argue that his emphasis on academic excellence and his efforts to modernize the curriculum and faculty diminished the importance of tradition and the liberal arts at Harvard. Others criticize his promotion of science and research, arguing that it shifted the university's focus away from teaching. Despite these criticisms, Eliot's contributions to Harvard are undeniable. Under his leadership, the university grew from a small, elite institution to one of the most prestigious universities in the world. And it wasn't just Eliot who was expanding the realm of knowledge. A former enslaved man named John Merrick, better known as Black John, was conducting his own form of scientific research. As the son of an enslaved woman, Merrick grew up working in the fields, but he was different from the other enslaved people. He was curious about the natural world and loved exploring the woods near his master's house. There, he learned to read and write, eventually educating himself in botany, meteorology, astronomy, and geography. Merrick developed his own theories based on his observations of nature, which he shared with visitors to his master's house. Though he received little formal education, Merrick's curiosity and thirst for knowledge led him to become a self-educated naturalist and astronomer. Sadly, not much is known about Merrick's life, but his story serves as a reminder that learning can take place anywhere and at any time. The growth of science during this period was not limited to universities. Many scientists were making important discoveries and advancements in their fields. For example, American astronomer Edward Pickering discovered a new method for measuring the brightness of stars, which revolutionized the study of astronomy. Another American astronomer, George Laureates, discovered sunspots using a new type of telescope. These advancements in astronomy allowed scientists to learn more about the universe and our place in it. Meanwhile, American inventor Alexander Graham Bell was making important contributions to the field of communication. Best known for inventing the telephone, Bell's work on sound and acoustics led to significant advances in the field. His invention of the photophone, which transmitted sound through beams of light, was a precursor to modern fiber-optic communication. Bell's work helped pave the way for the digital age and the rapid transmission of information around the world. Finally, we should also mention American physician and scientist Joseph LeConte, who made significant contributions to the field of biology. LeConte was one of the first to study evolution in the United States, and his work on the subject was highly influential. He also made important discoveries in the field of embryology, the study of the development of organisms from fertilization to birth. LeConte's work helped to advance our understanding of the natural world and the processes that drive it. As the 19th century drew to a close, Harvard was widely recognized as one of the finest universities in the world. Its reputation for academic excellence and cutting-edge research had grown significantly. This growth was due in large part to the modernization of the curriculum, the introduction of new technologies, and the expansion of the physical plant. In addition, Eliot's commitment to diversity and inclusion had helped to create a more welcoming and inclusive environment for students from all backgrounds. But the story of Harvard's growth and development during this period is not just about the contributions of one man or the advancements made in science and research. It's also about the dedication of countless students, faculty, and administrators who came before and after Eliot. Their hard work and dedication helped to shape Harvard into the world-renowned institution it is today. The growth and development of Harvard during the 19th century was nothing short of remarkable. From its humble beginnings as a small provincial college to its emergence as one of the most prestigious universities in the world, Harvard's journey was marked by challenges, but also by incredible achievements. The modernization of the curriculum, the introduction of new technologies and the expansion of the physical plant were all instrumental in driving this growth, and the contributions of individuals like Eliot, Bell, Halle, and Leconte helped to push the boundaries of knowledge and understanding. Thank you for joining us this week on The Presidents Are Coming. Join us next week as we continue our series with a look at the early life and career of Theodore Roosevelt. I'm the host. What does it mean for a university to be a leader in its field? Is it the quality of its research? The brilliance of its professors? Or is it something else entirely? We've heard many definitions of what makes a school great, but at Harvard, we have a unique answer. It means being a beacon of opportunity. Since our founding, we have striven to open doors and welcome talented students from around the world. Of course, it hasn't always been easy. There are times we fell short of our aspirations. But by confronting these challenges head-on, we can continue to perfect our definition of crimson excellence. This is Harvard. And now we're continuing our exploration of Harvard's history with Chapter 9, Opening Doors. After decades of exclusion, Harvard finally admitted its first black students in 1924. But while this marked a significant step forward, they were exceptions rather than the norm. It would be another 35 years before a second African-American student was admitted. Meanwhile, women had even fewer opportunities. For most of Harvard's early history, they could not enroll as undergraduates. Although a small number attended classes in the 19th century, it wasn't until 1879 that Harvard officially sanctioned the admission of women. But there was a catch. They could only enroll in the newly established Radcliffe College, a separate women's institution affiliated with Harvard. While Radcliffe provided access to Harvard courses, it was still considered a second-class institution with inferior facilities. But this situation began to change during World War II, when women filled positions traditionally held by men and proved their ability to excel in academic settings. In 1945, the newly appointed Radcliffe president, Mary Bunting, challenged the status quo, arguing that the separation of Radcliffe and Harvard was no longer tenable. She called for coeducation, the integration of male and female students across all schools and colleges. For a time, however, the faculty rejected her proposal, so Bunting took an even bolder step. In 1949, she invited several hundred female alumni from across the country to sign a petition supporting coeducation. And it worked. The following year, the faculty voted to admit women to graduate school. Then in 1963, they voted to fully integrate the college, allowing women to enroll at Harvard as undergraduates. While this marked a major victory, the fight for gender equality at Harvard did not end here. You see, although the undergraduate experience was now coeducational, much of campus life was still segregated. Women were still largely excluded from final clubs, the social organizations that played a central role in extracurricular life. And despite a few token appointments, no woman had ever served on the prestigious board of overseers that governed Harvard. By the late 1960s, however, the civil rights movement was gaining momentum, and women began demanding a greater say in how they were represented at Harvard. In 1969, after several hundred students occupied the administration building, the university agreed to admit women into final clubs. 2 years later, it appointed its first female tenured professor, and in 1977, it elected its first woman to the Board of Overseers. The fight for racial equality also continued. In the 1960s and 70s, the Black Student Union advocated for a separate black house, where students could live and socialize outside of the predominantly white residence halls. Administrators resisted their demands, concerned that such a facility would foster racial segregation. But in 1971, after several months of debate, they relented and created a cultural center open to students of color. This new space allowed minority students to forge community and pursue initiatives that celebrated their heritage. It also gave them a platform to advocate for change and push back against racism, both on campus and in the wider world. In the years since, Harvard has continued to expand and enrich these resources. Today, we have over 50 cultural organizations serving students of color, as well as the Black Men's Forum, which provides academic support and mentorship to African American men. Together, they help ensure that every student has the opportunity to succeed and make the most of their experience at Harvard. Yet despite these advances, the path toward diversity and inclusion has not been straightforward. In the late 1980s and early 90s, for instance, Harvard's financial aid practices came under fire. In 1990, The New York Times published an investigation detailing how wealthy donors could skirt need-blind admissions by paying hefty donations in exchange for admitting their children. This practice forced administrators to reconsider how they communicated about financial aid, ultimately leading to greater transparency and a reaffirmation of the university's commitment to need-blind admissions. Throughout our history, there have been other hurdles along the way, whether the uneven application of financial aid or inconsistent enforcement of anti-discrimination policies, but each challenge has pushed us closer to our ideals and helped pave the way for more students to access a Harvard education. We have long recognized that diversity is essential to academic excellence. By welcoming students from different backgrounds, perspectives, and experiences, we create an environment where everyone can learn and grow. That is why we've made it a priority to recruit a diverse pool of applicants and support them once they arrive on campus. Today, we are proud to have one of the most diverse student bodies of any university in the nation. Our class of 2026, for example, includes students from 127 countries and every U.S. state. 14% identify as Hispanic, 13% as Asian American and Pacific Islander, 8% as Black, and 6% as Native American, and 13% identify as LGBTQ+. These numbers are important. They reflect a deliberate effort on our part to create a more inclusive and representative community. But even as we celebrate our progress, we know there is still more work to be done. As Harvard's 10th president, I'm committed to ensuring that every member of our community feels a sense of belonging. We will continue to recruit a diverse pool of applicants and support them once they arrive on campus. And we will continue to confront issues of inequality and discrimination whenever they arise. Together, we can make Harvard the most inclusive and welcoming university in the world. Harvard has long been a place where brilliant minds come together to push the boundaries of knowledge. But what does it mean for a university to be at the forefront of academic excellence? Is it the quality of its research, the brilliance of its professors, or is it something else entirely? At Harvard, we believe that true excellence is defined by our ability to open doors and welcome talented students from around the world. Sure, it hasn't always been easy. There are times we fell short of our aspirations, but by confronting these challenges head-on, we can continue to perfect our definition of crimson excellence. And here's how you can be a part of that legacy. First, we encourage you to connect with us on social media. Join the conversation and follow our channel to get updates on our latest videos. Second, we invite you to explore our website, learn about our history, mission, and values, and stay informed about current events. Finally, we encourage you to engage with us directly. Share your thoughts, ask questions, and make your voice heard. Your engagement helps us tell the story of Harvard to a broader audience and strengthens our connection with the passionate members of our global community. Thank you for joining us as we continue to write the next chapter in Harvard's history. Together, we can keep our doors open and ensure that Harvard remains a beacon of opportunity for generations to come. Part 10. Harvard and American Culture. Harvard is probably America's most famous university, and like Yale, it has had an outsized influence on American culture. Now, when we think of the Ivy League, we think of academic excellence, but also great wealth and privilege. And the image of the student wearing a hoodie, eating nothing but takeout food while burning the midnight oil studying for exams, that just doesn't apply to Harvard. We tend to think of the students there as being very rich, which is true. But Harvard has produced some of our greatest writers, politicians, and jurists. It's a long list. T.S. Eliot, one of the giants of 20th century poetry, was born in St. Louis, Missouri. He attended Harvard and took classes from Irving Babbitt, who he considered his mentor. After graduating in 1910, Eliot spent time in England, where he lived for most of his life. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1948, but it was really his earlier work, The Waste Land, for quartets, and The Hollow Men that made him a giant. His poetry helped to define a generation and remains relevant today. And then there's Ralph Waldo Emerson, born in Boston in 1803. He attended Harvard Divinity School, though he did not finish his coursework, because he became increasingly critical of organized religion. Emerson was one of the central figures of New England transcendentalism, and he wrote extensively about nature, society, and spirituality. He's best known for his essay Self-Reliance, in which he famously wrote, "Trust thyself." That which is great in you must be great in others, too. How many times have we all needed to hear those words? John Kenneth Galbraith was another influential Harvard graduate. He was born in 1904 in a small town in Ontario, Canada. He attended both Harvard College and Harvard Business School, earned a doctorate in economics from the University of California at Berkeley. In 1949, Galbraith published his first book, The Great British Inflation. He went on to become a well-known economist and served as the U.S. ambassador to India and later to the United Nations. He was a strong critic of what he saw as the negative effects of globalization. One of his books, The Affluent Society, published in 1958, sharply criticized middle-class values, particularly consumerism. In his view, the pursuit of material wealth led to social injustice and environmental degradation, so he argued that government should do more to address these issues. Galbraith was a prolific writer with more than 30 books to his name. He died in 2006 at age 100. The influence of Harvard goes far beyond its graduates. Its faculty have been instrumental in advancing knowledge in various fields. John Rawls, for example, was a political philosopher whose work has had a profound impact on contemporary political thought. Born in 1921 in Princeton, New Jersey, he attended Harvard College and later earned his doctorate in philosophy from the University of Oxford. He taught at several universities, including Princeton and MIT, before joining the faculty at Harvard in 1971. At Harvard, he developed his theory of justice, which argues that society should be structured in such a way that everyone has an equal opportunity to pursue their goals, regardless of their background or circumstances. This theory is outlined in his most famous book, A Theory of Justice, published in 1971. The book was highly influential in the field of political philosophy and remains a classic in the field. In the late 1990s, Michael Sandel, the NT, and Robert Mbe, professor of government at Harvard, came up with the idea of a public philosophy which sought to make philosophy more accessible and relevant to a broader audience. As part of this initiative, he developed a course called Justice, which explored different conceptions of justice and how they applied to real-world problems. The course was so popular that it quickly became one of the largest courses at Harvard. Sandel's lectures were recorded and released as a podcast, which quickly became one of the most popular podcasts in the world. Sandel has written several books, including Liberalism and Its Discontents and The Tyranny of Merit. Both are important contributions to contemporary political thought. Martin Luther King Jr., the iconic civil rights leader, was born on January 15, 1929, in Atlanta, Georgia. He attended Crozer Theological Seminary in Pennsylvania, and later enrolled in Boston University's School of Theology. To earn his doctorate in theology, King was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964 for his work to end racial segregation in the United States. He was assassinated on April 4, 1968. Felix Frankfurter, born in 1882 in the small town of Bitola, in what was then the Ottoman Empire, now part of Greece. He attended Harvard Law School, becoming one of the youngest people ever to receive a doctorate in law from the institution. Frankfurter taught at several universities, including the University of Michigan and the University of California at Berkeley, before joining the faculty of Harvard Law School in 1930. He was a legal realist, a school of thought that emphasizes the role of social and economic context in the law rather than abstract principles. Frankfurter was a strong advocate for judicial restraint, arguing that judges should be cautious when striking down laws passed by democratically elected legislatures. He served as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States from 1937 to 1969. During his tenure, he was one of the most influential justices, writing numerous opinions that shaped American law. Frankfurter was a prolific writer who published several influential books, including The Case of Judicial Paternalism and On Being a Judge. It is difficult to imagine American culture without the influence of these individuals and many other Harvard graduates. Their contributions have shaped our world in profound ways. And yet, despite its impressive legacy, Harvard is not without its critics. Some argue that its immense wealth and prestige have given it too much power and influence, while others criticized the university's handling of sexual assault cases. Regardless of these criticisms, however, there's no denying that Harvard has played a major role in shaping American culture. But Harvard isn't only important because of its graduates or even its faculty. It's become something of a cultural icon, synonymous with academic excellence and privilege. We see this in popular culture, from movies to TV shows to music. For example, the movie Good Will Hunting, which is set in Boston, features Matt Damon and Robin Williams as a janitor who works at MIT and discovers that he has a genius IQ. Although the movie is set at MIT, it was actually filmed at Harvard, and the opening scene is meant to evoke the traditional rivalry between Harvard and Yale. In the movie, the two schools compete against each other in a sort of academic showdown. There's also the movie Legally Blonde, which follows a sorority girl who attends Harvard Law School. Of course, the movie is a comedy, and it plays on stereotypes about both sorority girls and Harvard Law. But it also shows just how powerful the Harvard brand is. The movie implies that if you go to Harvard, you must be intelligent and driven, even if you're a bit ditzy. Then there's the TV show The Good Wife, which follows a wife who returns to work as a lawyer after her husband, a politician, is involved in a sex scandal. The show is set in Chicago and has no direct connection to Harvard. However, the lead character, Alicia Florrick, is a graduate of Harvard Law School. This is just one example of how the Harvard brand can add credibility to a TV show. In this case, Alicia's intelligence and competence are called into question. When she re-enters the workforce, her Harvard degree serves as a reminder that she is, in fact, a highly skilled lawyer. Music has also been influenced by the Harvard brand. The band, the Presidents of the United States of America, for example, released a song called Harvard in 1995. The song is a parody of the typical college football fight song. The lyrics are nonsensical and repetitive, just like those of a real college fight song, and the song is deliberately overlong. All of this is meant to poke fun at what the band saw as the arrogance and elitism of Harvard students. In literature, the Harvard Crimson is a fictional newspaper that appears in the Harry Potter series. The Crimson is modeled after the Harvard Crimson, the oldest continuously published daily newspaper in the United States. The inclusion of the Crimson in the Harry Potter series has done a lot to promote the Harvard brand, even though the two institutions have no formal connection. As you can see, the influence of Harvard extends far beyond the classroom. It's a cultural icon that has been co-opted by Hollywood and popular culture, and it's hard to imagine American culture without it. Thank you for watching. See you next time. The course of the 20th century was shaped by epic struggles over democracy and freedom, war and peace, capitalism and communism, and few institutions did more to shape that course than Harvard University. Welcome to this house. This is Harvard University Presents, and today we're exploring Chapter 11, the 20th century. Global leadership and innovation. Our story begins with the dawn of the 20th century and the beginning of two world wars, which would test not only the world but also the limits of human ingenuity. Out of those conflicts would come new technologies, weapons, and innovations that would change the world forever. And Harvard would play a key role in advancing many of them. In 1914, when war broke out in Europe, President Emeritus Charles W. Eliot urged Harvard students to consider enlisting. Though America would remain officially neutral at first, Harvard men would join the fight. By 1917, over 1,500 Harvard undergraduates had enlisted in the armed services, including future Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter. In April of that year, the U.S. declared war on Germany and entered World War I, and Harvard's role in the war effort would prove immense. The outbreak of hostilities prompted the creation of the U.S. Student Army Training Corps, a federal program aimed at training Army officers on college campuses. Harvard readily agreed to participate, housing 1,800 trainees in its dormitories and utilizing its faculty for instruction. But it would be the work of one professor in particular that proved most vital to the war effort. George Minot, professor of clinical medicine, was asked to head a newly formed division of the American Red Cross, tasked with producing large quantities of blood plasma. His efforts led to the creation of the first large-scale blood bank, a critical innovation in trauma treatment that would save countless lives. Baik on campus, other professors and alumni would contribute to the war effort in their own ways. Lee Page, an instructor in architecture, helped design military housing in France. Meanwhile, alumnus Paul Freund, class of 1916, served as a member of the U.S. Shipping Board Emergency Fleet Corporation, helping oversee the construction of merchant ships that would transport troops and supplies. When the armistice was signed in November 1918, Harvard's contribution to the Allied victory was clear, but it was the end of one war and the beginning of another that would truly test Harvard's mettle. In September 1939, German troops marched into Poland, marking the beginning of World War II. Unlike World War I, America would have a much larger role in this conflict. As the war in Europe raged, Harvard prepared for a potential American entry. In June 1940, President James B. Conant met with President Franklin D. Roosevelt to discuss the possibility of expanding the university's role in training Army officers. Soon after, ROTC programs were established on campus, and in 1941, the university began admitting women to its undergraduate programs, opening up more opportunities for service. As the war in Europe intensified, so too did the role of Harvard's scientists. In 1941, Conant joined a group of scientists from MIT and other institutions to form the National Defense Research Committee, or NDRC, which would bring together industry and academia to produce much-needed technologies for the war effort. One such project was the British invention known as radar, which used radio waves to detect aircraft and other airborne objects. With the help of Harvard's renowned radio physicist G.W. Pierce, the NDRC created a radar unit capable of detecting enemy aircraft hundreds of miles away. This development gave American forces a critical advantage in the Battle of the Atlantic and the Battle of Britain. Another important contribution came from Harvard's medical school. In 1943, a team of researchers, led by Professor of Bacteriology Andrew C. McCollum, developed a synthetic form of penicillin, making the life-saving drug more widely available to troops. And it was Harvard's scientists who would also help develop some of the most destructive weapons of the war. J. Robert Oppenheimer, who received his Ph.D. from Harvard in 1927, would lead the Manhattan Project, the top-secret effort to develop the first atomic bomb. Several members of the project's scientific and engineering staff were Harvard alumni, including physicist Stanley Frankel, chemist Philip Morrison, and engineer Edward Teller. On July 16, 1945, the first atomic bomb was successfully tested in New Mexico's Jornada del Muerto. 6 weeks later, the United States would drop 2 atomic bombs on Japan, bringing an end to World War II. The end of the war brought about a new era for Harvard. In 1944, Congress passed the GI Bill of Rights, a sweeping package of economic and educational benefits for veterans. It included funding for college tuition and living expenses, making higher education affordable for millions of veterans and leading to a surge in college enrollment. Harvard saw a significant increase in applications from veterans, many of whom had served in the armed forces alongside each other. The influx of students allowed Harvard to expand its facilities and programs to accommodate its growing population. Between 1945 and 1950, the university saw an 85% increase in its student body, totaling nearly 20,000 students. Harvard expanded its physical plant accordingly, adding several residence halls and academic buildings to accommodate the increase. But it was the influx of veteran students that would have the most profound impact on the university. Their presence brought a renewed sense of purpose and commitment to public service. Many of these students had seen the horrors of war firsthand and were eager to use their educations to make a positive impact on the world. In 1949, the Harvard Crimson reported that 56% of the entering class had served in the armed forces, reflecting the university's commitment to serving those who had served the nation, and the legacy of service would continue for decades to come. In the years following World War II, Harvard's influence and prominence would grow, thanks in part to the efforts of one man, President Nathan Pusey, who took office in 1933 and would serve until 1969. Under his leadership, Harvard experienced unprecedented growth and change, becoming a global leader in science, law, medicine, and public service. Pusey's vision for Harvard was bold and ambitious. He wanted the university to be a beacon of academic excellence and a catalyst for positive change in the world. To achieve this, he made significant investments in faculty and research, expanded access to higher education, and promoted a spirit of public service among students. One of Pusey's most significant contributions was his commitment to diversity and inclusion. He was a strong advocate for equal opportunity and worked to break down barriers for women and minorities. In 1963, he appointed the first black tenured professor in the history of the Harvard Medical School, Dr. Kenneth B. Clark. Clark would go on to make significant contributions to our understanding of race relations and desegregation. Pusey also played a key role in the creation of the Afro-American Studies Department in 1969, which became the first ethnic studies department at a predominantly white university. President Pusey was also a champion of public service. He believed that education should not be just about acquiring knowledge, but also about using it to make a positive impact on society. To that end, he established the John F. Kennedy School of Government in 1936 and the Center for International Affairs in 1952. These initiatives would go on to produce generations of public servants who would make a lasting impact on the world. It was under Pusey's leadership that Harvard would take its place as a global leader in science. In 1957, Harvard researchers led the development of the first successful satellite to orbit the Earth, and in 1961, Harvard Medical School researchers discovered the structure of insulin, a critical breakthrough in the fight against diabetes. But it was perhaps in the field of medicine where Harvard made the most significant advances. In 1952, Harvard Medical School researchers developed the first artificial kidney, a device that has since saved countless lives. And in 1967, Harvard researchers discovered the first human oncogene, a gene that can cause cancer, a discovery that has revolutionized our understanding of the disease. Indeed, it was Harvard's commitment to excellence and innovation that set it apart from other universities. Harvard's faculty and staff were world-renowned experts in their fields, who were dedicated to pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. They were supported by state-of-the-art facilities and resources that allowed them to pursue their research and teaching with the utmost rigor and precision. And they were guided by a shared set of values that emphasized intellectual curiosity, creativity, and the pursuit of truth. Today, Harvard's influence and impact continue to be felt around the world. Its graduates and alumni are leaders in business, government, academia, and civil society. And its research and scholarship continue to shape our understanding of the world around us. But perhaps most importantly, Harvard's commitment to diversity, inclusion, and public service remains as strong as ever. It is a testament to the enduring legacy of President Nathan Pusey and all those who have come before and after him. Thank you for joining us for this episode of This House. To learn more about the history of Harvard University, please visit our website and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more videos like this one. This is Chapter 12 of our series on the history of Harvard University. And in this chapter, we're going to talk about how Harvard has dealt with the challenges of the modern era, particularly focusing on how they adapted to technological change. If you haven't seen them yet, be sure to check out the previous videos on the playlist linked here and in the description below. And if you enjoy this video, subscribe for more content on higher education and other topics. One of the big changes that we see at Harvard during the presidency of Drew Gilpin, Faust, who served from 2007 to 2018, was a conscious effort to lean more into being an elite research university. This meant expanding into areas where Harvard was relatively weak, such as engineering, but also expanding into adjacent areas where Harvard had traditionally been strong. An example of this was the creation of the Harvard Innovation Labs. The story of the Innovation Labs really begins in 2007, when the university opened the doors to the Smith Campus Center, which housed the new campus-wide makerspace for students. Soon after, President Faust announced a plan to build off of this makerspace and create innovation labs all across campus. Over the next decade or so, these innovation labs would become home to over 150 faculty innovation teams working on everything from 3D printing to biotechnology to nanotechnology. They also created the Harvard Innovation Sandbox, which is basically an in-house venture fund for student startups. In 2015, President Faust made a major speech outlining her vision for how Harvard could better support innovation and entrepreneurship among its students. She said that while Harvard was America's oldest university, she wanted it to be known as America's most entrepreneurial university as well. Now, whether or not that goal was accomplished is up for debate. But what is up for debate is that Harvard has taken significant strides to becoming a leader in innovation and entrepreneurship in American higher education. Harvard has long prided itself on being able to adapt to changing circumstances, and the founding of the university's Innovation Labs is just the latest example of that adaptability. And they have done this without abandoning their traditional academic values, unlike some of their peers. For example, MIT has long been associated with innovation and entrepreneurship, so much so that they have their own dedicated school for it, the MIT Sloan School of Management. In contrast, Harvard recognized that while innovation and entrepreneurship were important, they did not want to sacrifice the quality of the student experience at the core of the university. So instead of creating a separate school for innovation and entrepreneurship, Harvard decided to fold those aspirations into existing schools. For example, Harvard Business School added a dedicated concentration in entrepreneurship and innovation in 2006. And then there are centers like the Berkman Center for Internet and Society, which was founded in 2000 and focuses on the social, political, economic, and legal implications of emerging technologies. Another way that Harvard has dealt with the challenge of the modern era is by being more proactive in addressing diversity issues. As early as 1991, Harvard established the Committee on Degrees in Studies of Women, Gender, and Sexuality. Then in 2002, they appointed their first vice president for diversity and equal opportunity. These moves were made in response to growing criticism that Harvard was undoing enough to address diversity and inclusion issues on campus. By establishing these positions, Harvard signaled that they were committed to making progress on these issues and that they would not wait for external pressure to force their hand. This proactive approach has paid off for Harvard in several ways. First, it has created a more inclusive and welcoming campus for underrepresented students. Second, it has helped Harvard to attract top talent from all backgrounds. And third, it has enhanced Harvard's reputation as a leader in diversity and inclusion. Finally, another way that Harvard has addressed the challenges of the modern era is by thinking globally. While many universities are content to focus on their domestic reputation, Harvard has always had a global mindset. This is evident in the university's early days when they actively recruited students from all over the world. Today, over 15% of Harvard's student body is made up of international students. Harvard also has over 150 global partners, including universities, governments, and nonprofits. Through these partnerships, Harvard is able to offer students unique opportunities for study abroad, research, and internships. Aditya Niji Harvard has a number of centers and initiatives focused on global issues, such as the Harvard Kennedy School as Center for Public Leadership, which works with leaders from all over the world to address global challenges. Overall, Harvard's global mindset has helped the university to remain at the forefront of higher education and has allowed them to tackle some of the most pressing issues facing our world today. But what about academics? How has Harvard remained a top academic institution in the face of competition from other elite universities like Yale, Princeton, and Stanford? Well, one way that Harvard has stayed at the top of the academic game is by being willing to experiment. For example, in 2006, Harvard launched the Open Course Project, which made course materials from hundreds of Harvard classes available online for free. This was a risky move that could have easily backfired. But Harvard was willing to take the risk, and it paid off in a big way. The Open Course Project has been a huge success, both in terms of popularity and impact. Millions of people around the world have accessed Harvard courses through this project, and it has helped to make Harvard more accessible to a wider audience. Additionally, the project has generated a lot of goodwill for Harvard, positioning the university as a leader in innovation and accessibility in higher education. Harvard's willingness to experiment has also been evident in their approach to teaching. In recent years, Harvard has made a concerted effort to improve the quality of teaching across campus. This has involved investing in new teaching initiatives, providing faculty with more resources and support, and making teaching a higher priority for promotion and tenure decisions. The results of these efforts have been impressive. Student evaluations of teaching have increased, and Harvard has become a more attractive destination for top faculty from around the world. Another way that Harvard has stayed at the top of the academic game is by being bold in their hiring. Over the years, Harvard has made a concerted effort to hire faculty who are not only brilliant scholars, but also outstanding teachers and mentors. This has resulted in a faculty that is not only highly respected, but also deeply committed to the student experience. For example, in 2009, Harvard hired Drew Faust as its first woman president. This was a bold move that sent a message that Harvard was committed to diversity and inclusion at the highest levels of the university. Faust was widely seen as a trailblazer for women in academia, and her hiring generated a lot of positive attention for Harvard. Similarly, in 2017, Harvard hired its first black woman dean of the college. These are just a few examples of the many ways that Harvard has stayed at the top of the academic game. By being willing to experiment, hire boldly, and prioritize teaching, Harvard has been able to maintain its position as one of the world's leading universities. As we close this chapter on Harvard in the modern era, it's clear that the university has a bright future ahead of it. Harvard has addressed the challenges of the modern era head-on by embracing innovation, diversity and inclusion, and thinking globally. The result is a university that is not only more successful than ever, but also more representative of the world we live in today. And now we turn it over to you. What are your thoughts on Harvard's performance in the modern era? Do you think they have done enough to address issues of diversity and inclusion? What about their efforts to embrace innovation? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe for more content. You can also watch more of our videos by clicking the links on your screen. Thank you. Thank you. Chapter 13. The campus. Timeless spaces and symbols if you wander into Harvard Yard on a crisp autumn morning. The world seems to slow down. The branches of ancient elm trees sway gently overhead, and the red brick paths worn smooth by generations of footsteps glow warmly under the soft light. This is Harvard's heart, a place that has witnessed nearly 4 centuries of ambition, contemplation, and discovery. The campus is more than just buildings. It is a living chronicle of American history and intellectual pursuit. Its spaces and symbols tell stories of presidents, poets, reformers, scientists, and visionaries whose work has shaped the world. A yard that told for centuries of echoes. Harvard Yard itself is a modest, fenced green space. In Cambridge, but within its boundaries, lie memories older than the nation. Imagine the 17th century students in plain woolen coats, treading the same ground as modern undergraduates, tapping on laptops beneath the trees. The yard has always been a gathering place, common ground where youthful energy meets enduring tradition. The worn steps of Massachusetts Hall, Harvard's oldest surviving building, speak of resilience. Constructed in 1720, it once housed students and soldiers alike. During the American Revolution, Continental Army troops quartered here, their boots muddy from the march, their whispers of independence echoing against the brick walls. In the yard's quiet corners, you can almost hear the voices of alumni who would go on to steer the destiny of nation's U.S. presidents such as John Adams, John Quincy Adams, Theodore and Franklin Roosevelt, and John F. Kennedy. All began their journeys here. Their experiences at Harvard molded their understanding of leadership, debate, and the responsibilities of power. In the evenings, as twilight settles and the yard glows beneath lantern light, it's easy to picture a young Kennedy or Roosevelt crossing the grass, books in hand, unaware of how profoundly they would shape the world. White Inner Library. A cathedral of knowledge at the heart of the campus stands White Inner Library, its grand steps sweeping up to columns that exude permanence and grace. Inside, the air smells faintly of old paper, a perfume of wisdom collected over centuries. With more than 3.5 million volumes, Whitino is one of the largest university libraries in the world. Its origin is a story of both tragedy and devotion. It was built in 1915 in memory of Harry Elkins White, a Harvard alumnus who perished aboard the Titanic. His mother, Eleanor Elkins Widner, donated the funds to create this magnificent library so that her son's passion for books would live on. Every reader who studies under its ornate ceilings participates in that act of remembrance. Beyond its physical scale, White Inner represents Harvard's commitment to preserving and sharing human knowledge. Students and scholars pore over rare manuscripts, ancient maps, and letters from great thinkers. Some of these works influenced Nobel Prize-winning research or Supreme Court decisions. The library's hushed halls are a place where the past whispers to the future. Memorial Hall, a testament to sacrifice and community. A short walk from White Inner brings you to Memorial Hall, with its Victorian Gothic architecture and towering spire. Completed in the late 19th century, it honors Harvard alumni who fought and died for the Union during the Civil War. The names engraved on its walls remind visitors that Harvard's history is inseparable from the nation. Struggles and triumphs. Beneath its vaulted ceiling, Annenberg Hall, grand dining hall for first-year students buzzes with conversation every evening, blending the solemnity of memorial with the warmth of community. This combination of remembrance and life illustrates a core Harvard value: Learning is not just about books, but about shared experience and collective memory. The John Harvard statue. Myth and tradition. No tour of Harvard is complete without a stop at the John Harvard statue. Bronze and dignified, it sits just outside University Hall. Tourists line up daily to snap photos and rub the statue's left foot, a gesture believed to bring good luck. Yet the statue is famously inaccurate. It isn't actually modeled on John Harvard, and the inscription proclaims him the founder when, in truth, he was a benefactor. Harvard students fondly refer to it as the Statue of Three Lies. The playful tradition of foot-rubbing and the self-aware humor behind the nickname reveal another side of Harvard. Even the oldest university in the United States embraces humility and a touch of whimsy, science and innovation. Labs that changed the world beyond the yard. Harvard's campus sprawls into modern research centers and laboratories. Here scientists have unraveled DNA's secrets, pioneered life-saving medical treatments, and developed technologies that touch every aspect of our lives. In these spaces, Nobel laureates and groundbreaking researchers have worked late into the night, their discoveries pushing the boundaries of knowledge. The halls of Harvard Medical School and the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics remind us that the campus is not just a museum of tradition, it is an engine of innovation. When you picture those laboratories glowing softly in the evening, imagine the quiet hum of machines and the quiet determination of scholars shaping tomorrow's breakthroughs. The Harvard Lampoon Building and cultural influence. Harvard has not only produced leaders in politics and science, but also in culture and entertainment. The whimsical Harvard Lampoon Building, shaped like a tiny castle, has nurtured humorists and writers who would go on to shape American comedy from National Lampoon to Saturday Night Live. The campus pathways have been trodden by literary giants like T.S. Eliot and E.E. Cummings, whose poetic voices still resonate today. Through its students and alumni, Harvard has influenced films, literature, television, and journalism, shaping the culture that frames how we see ourselves and our world. Harvard Yard at night. A place of reflection at night. When the campus quiets and the lanterns cast pools of light on the paths, the yard becomes a place of reflection. It's easy to imagine a young student pausing beneath the trees, considering their place in history. Perhaps a future Supreme Court justice has done the same. Harvard has educated dozens of justices whose rulings have defined the boundaries of rights and freedoms in the United States. From Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. to Elena Kagan, their legal minds were sharpened here, amid discussions under these same elms. Global connections and policy shaping Harvard's influence extends far beyond Cambridge. Its Kennedy School of Government has trained diplomats, heads of state, and policy experts whose decisions reverberate worldwide. Alumni have played central roles in drafting international agreements, leading humanitarian efforts, and pioneering economic reforms. From Nobel Peace Prize winners who brokered peace accords to scientists tackling climate change, the campus's classrooms and lecture halls have been the starting point for global solutions. When you stand in Harvard Yard, you stand in a place that has quietly shaped the policies and cultures of distant nations. Tradition meets modernity. Old buildings and new visions. While the artes of the 18th century buildings remind visitors of Harvard's long history, the university continues to evolve. The glass-walled science centers and cutting-edge arts complexes symbolize a forward-looking spirit. Walking from Massachusetts Hall to the Science Center is like crossing centuries in minutes. Yet even with these changes, there is continuity. The same curiosity and determination that animated John Harvard's gift in 1638 still pulses through the campus. Stories of values in action. Consider Barack Obama, a Harvard Law alumnus, whose time on the Harvard Law Review honed skills that would guide him as president. Think of physicist John Bardeen, a two-time Nobel laureate who helped revolutionize technology through the invention of the transistor. Or Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who, though she completed her degree elsewhere, spent formative years at Harvard Laureates that shaped her fight for gender equality. Each story reflects Harvard's values: rigorous scholarship, moral responsibility, and the belief that knowledge should serve humanity. Even lesser-known alumni embody these ideals. Countless teachers, doctors, engineers, and public servants carry Harvard's spirit into communities worldwide. Their quieter contributions educating children, healing patients, Designing sustainable technologies are equally powerful threads in Harvard's tapestry. The campus as a living symbol. The physical campus is not simply a backdrop. Each building and pathway is a touchstone for memory and aspiration. Tourists may see picturesque brickwork and ivy, but 2 generations of students, these spaces are companions on their journey of growth. The bells of Memorial Church toll across the yard, reminding all who hear them that learning is both a privilege and a responsibility. The Charles River, flowing serenely nearby, has witnessed countless regattas and quiet reflections on its banks. Harvard's rowing crews, one of the oldest in the nation, add their own stories of teamwork and discipline to the campus lore. Closing reflections. As we leave Harvard Yard, under the starlit sky, we see the silhouettes of steeples and chimneys fading into the night. The campus rests, but its stories never sleep. Here past meets future every day. In a lecture hall where a student discovers a new idea, in a library where ancient texts wait patiently for curious hands, in a courtyard where friends share dreams that might one day reshape the world. Harvard's timeless spaces and symbols remind us that knowledge is not confined to any moment. It flows across generations, carried forward by those who dared to learn, to question, and to create. Tomorrow, more students will cross these paths. Among them may be future presidents, scientists, or artists whose names we do not yet know. But tonight, in the quiet of Harvard Yard, their destinies are seeds, gently held in the embrace of tradition and possibility. The campus hums with history's heartbeat, inviting all who enter to listen closely and carry its values into the world beyond the gates. In this chapter, we'll meet some famous alumni and see what they have been up to since leaving Harvard. You'll find that many of them continue to uphold the ideals established by the university's founders. John Adams, the 2nd President of the United States, was known for his intelligence, wit, an unwavering commitment to public service. He graduated from Harvard in 1755, earning him the title of America's first college graduate president. In fact, until John F. Kennedy was elected in 1960, every president had attended Harvard or Yale. Although not a scientist, he understood the importance of education and intellectual pursuits. Adams once said, "A democracy cannot be preserved in ignorance." He believed that an informed citizenry was essential to the success of any democratic society. This belief led him to support measures that promoted education and the spread of knowledge, ensuring that future generations of Americans would be well equipped to participate in the political process and contribute to the nation's progress. He was succeeded by Thomas Jefferson, who also attended Harvard. He actually graduated from the College of William and Mary, but while there he took classes at Harvard due to the temporary closure of his school during the Revolutionary War. As the principal author of the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson was a key figure in the American Revolution and the founding of the United States. His contributions to early American politics were instrumental in shaping the course of the nation's history. Following his presidency, he continued to champion causes that he believed in, such as the separation of church and state through the passage of the First Amendment. He believed that government should not interfere with the free exercise of religion, which remains a cornerstone of American society today. He also played a significant role in the acquisition of the Louisiana Territory from France in 1803, which doubled the size of the United States and secured control of the Mississippi River. John Quincy Adams, son of John Adams, was the 6th President of the United States and also a Harvard alum. He was a strong advocate for education and the role it played in shaping individuals and communities. He recognized that access to quality education was essential for the advancement of society and the empowerment of its citizens. During his time in office, he supported measures to promote public education, believing that it was crucial for the growth and development of the nation. Adams also played a significant role in the development of the Monroe Doctrine, which outlined the principles governing relations between the Americas and Europe. This doctrine had a profound impact on American foreign policy and helped to establish the United States as a major player on the world stage. Theodore Roosevelt was the 26th President of the United States and a graduate of Harvard's class of 1882. A member of the Republican Party, Roosevelt championed progressive reforms and was a staunch conservationist. He established the National Park Service to protect natural and historical landmarks for future generations to enjoy. The Antiquities Act was passed under his presidency, allowing him to declare certain lands as national monuments. It remains the primary tool used to protect significant cultural and natural resources. He also expanded the U.S. Navy, recognizing the importance of a strong military presence in maintaining national security and projecting power on the world stage. During his presidency, he oversaw the construction of the Panama Canal, which greatly facilitated trade and travel between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. This monumental achievement was a testament to Roosevelt's vision for a more interconnected world and his commitment to American interests. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, often referred to as FD, was the 32nd President of the United States and a graduate of Harvard's class of 1904. He served during the Great Depression and World War II, guiding the country through some of its most challenging times. Franklin D. Roosevelt's presidency was marked by the implementation of the New Deal, a series of programs and reforms aimed at providing relief, recovery, and reform in response to the economic crisis. These initiatives had a profound impact on the lives of millions of Americans, providing them with much-needed assistance and instilling confidence in the government's commitment to their well-being. Additionally, Roosevelt's leadership during World War II was instrumental in securing victory for the Allied forces. He made the decision to deploy the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, bringing an end to the war and ushering in a new era in world history. Despite facing numerous challenges and setbacks, Roosevelt persevered, demonstrating courage, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to his principles. The influence of Harvard extends beyond the realm of politics. The university has also produced a number of Nobel laureates, who have made significant contributions to various fields of study. In the field of physics, John Bardeen was a pivotal figure in the development of transistors and superconductors. His work laid the foundation for modern electronic devices and contributed to our understanding of quantum mechanics. Bardeen graduated from Harvard in 1928 with a PhD in physics. He went on to teach at the University of Illinois, before joining the faculty of Stanford in 1954. While working at Bell Telephone Laboratories, he co-invented the transistor, a revolutionary invention that replaced bulky vacuum tubes and enabled the creation of smaller, more efficient electronic devices. His research on superconductivity led to the development of new materials and technologies that are used in a wide range of applications, including medical imaging and nuclear fusion. Roger Kornberg is a biochemist who won the Nobel Prize for his work on DNA replication. His studies provided insights into the molecular mechanisms that govern the transmission of genetic information, which is fundamental to understanding life itself. He graduated from Harvard in 1970 with a PhD in biological chemistry. After postdoctoral research at the University of California, San Francisco, he joined the faculty of Stanford in 1975. Throughout his career, he has made significant contributions to the field of biochemistry, including the discovery of RNA polymerase, the enzyme responsible for synthesizing RNA from DNA. His research has had a profound impact on our understanding of gene expression and the regulation of cellular processes. Other notable Harvard alumni include Supreme Court justices such as Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., Felix Frankfurter, and Louis Brandeis. These individuals played key roles in shaping the interpretation and application of the law, upholding the principles of justice and equality. In the field of science, the legacy of Harvard continues with distinguished alumni like George Whipple, who won the Nobel Prize for his work on blood transfusion. His research advanced our understanding of blood physiology and paved the way for the development of new medical treatments. Also, David Baltimore, who shared the Nobel Prize for his discoveries concerning the interaction between tumor viruses and the genetic material of the cell. His work provided valuable insights into the mechanisms of cancer development and the potential for viral-based therapies. Harvard has also been home to groundbreaking scientists like James Watson, one of the pioneers of molecular biology. Watson, along with Francis Crick, discovered the double helix structure of DNA, revolutionizing our understanding of genetics and heredity. His contributions to the field of biology have had a profound impact on medicine, agriculture, and biotechnology. Beyond science and politics, Harvard's influence can be seen in various sectors of society. For example, Derek Bok, a former Harvard president, has been a leading advocate for open government and government transparency. His work has helped to ensure that citizens have access to information and that government officials are held accountable. Another notable alumnus is Michael Bloomberg, the founder of Bloomberg LP and former mayor of New York City. Bloomberg is known for his contributions to data journalism and his efforts to address global challenges, such as climate change and gun violence. Furthermore, Harvard's impact can be seen in the cultural sphere with alumni like Steven Spielberg, a highly successful film director and producer whose cinematic masterpieces have captivated audiences worldwide. His films have not only entertained, but have also explored profound social and political issues. Similarly, Tom Stoppard, a renowned playwright and screenwriter, has made significant contributions to the world of theater and film. His thought-provoking plays and screenplays have addressed themes of identity, memory, and the nature of reality, captivating audiences and critics alike. These are just a few examples of the many famous alumni that Harvard has produced. Their accomplishments and contributions serve as a testament to the university's commitment to academic excellence, intellectual curiosity, and the pursuit of knowledge. Each of these individuals has made a unique and lasting impact on their respective fields, shaping our world in profound ways. They represent the true spirit of scholarship, which is at the core of Harvard's mission. As you consider the stories of these alumni, reflect on the values and ideals that have shaped their journeys. How have they embodied the spirit of inquiry, innovation, and service that Harvard strives to instill in its students? What lessons can you draw from their experiences, and how can you apply them to your own aspirations and goals? By examining the legacies of these extraordinary individuals, we gain a deeper appreciation for the power of education and the transformative impact it can have on lives and on the world. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more informative content. And if you have the time, please watch another video from this series. This is chapter 15, and all good things must come to an end. So we're going to return to where we started our tour, the Harvard Yard. But at twilight, the sun is dipping behind the buildings of the Holyoke Center, throwing long shadows across the grass. You can hear the distant hum of traffic from the nearby Charles River Dam, but otherwise it's very quiet. You sit down on one of the benches near the Widener Library and look up at the old brick and brownstone facades that line the yard. Some of the windows have flickered on. Inside those rooms are students writing papers or reading books, or perhaps sitting back in their chairs listening to music. Outside, the air is getting cooler now, and there's a slight breeze rustling through the leaves of the elms that line the yard. It feels like the perfect moment for reflection, for thinking about everything you've seen and learned today. And as you sit here in the fading light, you realize that your experience today has been more than just a visit to a famous university. You've had a glimpse into the life of the mind, the endless quest for knowledge that has driven humanity forward for thousands of years. You've seen how this quest has played out in one of its most spectacular settings, the campus of Harvard University. But now, it's time to say goodbye. As the last rays of sunlight fade away, you feel a sense of peace and contentment wash over you. You've come full circle. You began your day in this same spot, not knowing what to expect. And now, as the night draws in around you, you know that you'll never forget what you've experienced here. The story of Harvard is a long one. It began in 1636 when a group of Puritan ministers met in the town of Newdown, now Cambridge, to establish a college that would train young men for the ministry. They named it after John Harvard, a clergyman who had recently died and left them a generous bequest of books and money. The ministers hoped that Harvard College, as it was called, would become a center of religious and intellectual life in the New World. And for the first 2 centuries of its existence, the college fulfilled that mission. But as America changed, so did Harvard. In the 18th century, the college became a hotbed of political activity as students and faculty alike chafed under the restrictions imposed by British rule. In the 19th century, Harvard grew rapidly, both in size and prestige, thanks to the efforts of its president, Charles Eliot, who expanded the curriculum and made the university more accessible to students from all walks of life. In the 20th century, Harvard became a global powerhouse of academic research, attracting top scholars and students from around the world. Today, Harvard is one of the most prestigious universities in the world. Its alumni and faculty have made groundbreaking contributions to fields as diverse as medicine, science, business, government, and the arts. But despite its wealth and power, Harvard remains true to its original mission of teaching and research. The university's motto, Veritas, meaning truth, is a reminder of the importance of intellectual honesty and the pursuit of knowledge. As you walk through the campus, you see evidence of this commitment everywhere. In the 1740s, the old yard was laid out, creating a green space surrounded by the college's first buildings. This simple design has been copied by countless other universities, but it was Harvard that started it all. When Harvard was founded in 1636, it was the first institution of higher learning in the British North American colonies. For nearly 200 years, it stood alone, a beacon of intellectual light in the wilderness. But as the colonies grew, so did the need for more colleges, and Harvard's influence helped to spark the founding of many of America's most prestigious universities, including Yale, Princeton, and Columbia. In fact, at one point, the presidents of all three of these schools were Harvard graduates. In the early days, the curriculum at Harvard was heavily influenced by the Puritans, who believed that the purpose of education was to prepare young men for lives of public service. Ministers, doctors, and teachers were the most highly regarded professions, and the classics were seen as the best preparation for these roles. However, as the 19th century wore on, the curriculum began to change. Eliot's vision was to make Harvard the world's most comprehensive and versatile university. Under his leadership, the number of courses offered to students grew dramatically, and new departments were created in subjects as diverse as chemistry, biology, and philosophy. Eliot also believed that education should be accessible to all qualified students, regardless of their background or beliefs. He opened up admissions to students from other Christian denominations as well as Jews and, in a controversial move, women. This made Harvard one of the most diverse universities in the country. By the end of the 19th century, Harvard was widely seen as the best university in America. Its graduates went on to hold important positions in government, business, and academia, and the university's endowment grew steadily, thanks in part to the generosity of alumni like John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, and George Eastman. But Harvard's rise to prominence did not come without its critics. Many people saw the university's growing power and influence with suspicion, believing that it was becoming too much of a force in national affairs. There were also those who opposed the university's growing diversity, both in terms of its student body and its curriculum. Nevertheless, Harvard continued to grow and prosper into the 20th century. The university played a major role in advancing knowledge in fields as diverse as medicine, physics, and computer science. And its graduates went on to make important contributions to society, whether as leaders in government, innovators in business, or scholars in academia. Despite its success, however, Harvard has not been immune to the challenges facing higher education today. The cost of tuition has risen dramatically, leading to concerns about the affordability of a college education. There are also concerns about the growing influence of alumni and donors on university affairs, as well as the growing bureaucracy of large research universities like Harvard. Nonetheless, Harvard remains one of the most prestigious universities in the world. Its graduates are highly sought after by employers, and its faculty continue to make important contributions to knowledge. As you sit on the bench, you remember the faces of the students you've met during your tour. There's the young woman studying literature, the wide-eyed freshman, the intense graduate student, the retired professor. All of them are united by their love of learning and their admiration for this great institution. Harvard is more than just a school. It's a community of scholars, a place where ideas are shared and debated, a place where the next generation of leaders is educated. As the night deepens around you, you feel a sense of gratitude for the opportunity to have visited this special place. You've seen the beauty of its historic buildings, the energy of its students and faculty, the dedication of its staff, and the passion of its alumni. You've learned about the university's rich history and its contributions to American life, and you've had a chance to reflect on the importance of education and the pursuit of knowledge. But now it's time to say goodbye. As the last rays of sunlight fade away, you know that you'll never forget what you've experienced here. The spirit of Harvard will stay with you long after you've left the campus. And when you tell others about your visit, you'll do so with pride and enthusiasm, for you've seen firsthand what makes Harvard so special: the people, the ideas, and the enduring legacy of a university that has shaped the course of American history. So, thank you for joining us on this tour of Harvard University. We hope you've enjoyed learning about this great institution and its contributions to American life. If you'd like to learn more about Harvard, please visit our website. And if you're planning a trip to Cambridge, we encourage you to take a walking tour of the campus. It's a great way to see the historic buildings and learn more about Harvard's rich history. As you drift off to sleep tonight, let the whispers of centuries past carry you away. Imagine the footsteps of generations of students echoing around you as they, too, explored the hallowed halls of Harvard. Let their dreams and aspirations inspire you. And as you close your eyes, picture the old brick and stone facades of Harvard Yard, bathed in the warm glow of twilight. May the spirit of Harvard live on in your heart long after you've said your goodbyes. Thank you for listening. To experience Harvard for yourself, plan your visit to the campus today.